There are stories that sound so ridiculous you'll think no way anyone believed this. And then you find out, not only did people believe it, an entire society once did. If you've ever almost clicked a get-rich-in-a-week trick or read a miracle cure post and thought, okay, but what if it's actually true, then congratulations. You just did what humans have been doing for hundreds of years. History isn't built only by geniuses and inventions. It's also packed with moments when smart people, educated people, doctors, scientists, the press, even governments all nodded along and believed things that honestly nobody should have believed. In this episode, we're going to walk through 31 historical hoaxes like that. And it all begins with a childbirth case that medicine definitely wants to forget. Story 1. The woman who gave birth to rabbits, Mary Toft. 18th century England was a time when medicine was still pretty optimistic about its own imagination. And then Mary Toft showed up claiming she wasn't giving birth like a normal person. She was giving birth to rabbits. Not a metaphor. Actual rabbits. With fur with ears, and honestly, they also seemed confused about being dragged into history like this. The craziest part wasn't that Mary said it. It was that a group of serious doctors nodded, took notes, and discussed it like they'd just discovered an upgraded version of childbirth. For weeks, Mary kept delivering more rabbits, enough to get the medical world excited, like they'd unlocked a brand new human body DLC, until someone got caught sneaking rabbits into the sick room, and the whole magic trick collapsed. In silence. The lesson is painfully clear: when something ridiculous is presented seriously enough, people will believe it just as seriously. Story 2. The Petrified Giant. The Cardiff Giant. 19th century America had a really adorable belief: if something is big enough and weird enough, it might be history. So when a petrified giant nearly 3 meters long got dug up in New York, the entire country immediately lost its mind in a happy way. In reality, it was just a rock. But it was a rock with a story that slapped. The landowner set up a tent, put up signs, and sold tickets. People lined up, paid gladly, and stood there staring at a chunk of stone, fully convinced they were witnessing ancient proof of humanity. Even the skeptics bought tickets, because in the back of their heads the classic line was still playing. What if it's true, though? Eventually the show collapsed. The giant was a product George Hull paid to have carved so he could make money. The Cardiff Giant left behind a very American lesson: if you can sell belief in a way that's entertaining enough, people won't pay to learn the truth, they'll pay to get to believe. Story 3. Life on the Moon. The Moon Hoax. In 1835, American newspapers were locked in a survival-level arms race. Whoever was more sensational won. And New York Sun decided not to play small. They published a series of articles claiming that scientists had just discovered life on the moon. Not bacteria, not moss, but bat people, unicorns, glowing temples, and an entire ecosystem that sounded like it was written at 2 a.m. after 3 cups of coffee and 0 supervision. The impressive part, it was written with absolute seriousness, loaded with scientific details, charts, descriptions, confident language, enough to make readers nod along like, huh, yeah, that checks out. And America believed it. The paper sold like crazy. Other newspapers stayed quiet, then quietly reprinted the story. When the truth finally came out, there was no dramatic apology. Just a nationwide, collective, awkward silence. If this story feels familiar, that's because it is. This was modern clickbait. The only difference being that back then there was no dislike button. Story 4. The Fiji Mermaid. P.T. Barnum. The 19th century was the early age of entertainment. People didn't have Netflix, but they absolutely still wanted to watch things that were weird, unsettling, and mildly traumatic. And P.T. Barnum understood this better than anyone. So he introduced the Fiji Mermaid as living proof of the mysterious world beneath the ocean. Small problem, the mermaid didn't really look like a mermaid. Top half a monkey, bottom half a fish. Stitched together with strong, we made this overnight because the show opens tomorrow energy. It was creepy, it was sad, and somehow impossible to look away. So people paid. A lot of people paid. Barnum wasn't selling beauty. He was selling curiosity. He knew the crowd didn't need perfection. They needed something that made them stare, then stare again, then say, okay, but what is that? When the truth came out, no one was really shocked. Because in American show business, the real question was never, is it real? It was always, does it sell tickets? Story 5. The Cottingley Fairy Photos. It started super simple. Two kids cut out a few fairies from cardboard, pinned them to a tree branch, and took a photo. Just harmless kid mischief. The problem was, adults looked at it and went, "Oh, this must be real." And then the story escalated. The press jumped in. The public nodded along. And then the intellectuals showed up. Even Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes looked at those blurry little photos and concluded, this can't be fake. The whole world debated it. Not because the pictures were crystal clear, but because people wanted to believe. They wanted to believe magic still existed. They wanted to believe the world still had room for tiny winged creatures just hanging out in the bushes like it's normal. The truth didn't come out until decades later when the girls themselves admitted it. It was just cardboard and pins. No fairies, no magic. And the real question isn't how did they fool everyone? It's this. Why are we always so ready to believe something cute just because it makes us feel better? Story 6. The Missing Link of Humanity Piltdown Man. In the early 20th century, science had a very specific craving: find the missing link between humans and apes. Britain had an additional craving: please let that discovery happen on British soil. And then Piltdown Man appeared. A skull with a human-sized brain and a jaw that looked very ape-adjacent. Perfect. Suspiciously perfect. Scientists looked at it and went, yeah, it's a bit weird, but I like where this conclusion is going. So they believed it, very seriously, for almost 40 years. During that time, textbooks were rewritten. Museums built displays. And any discoveries that didn't match this story were quietly ignored because they didn't fit the narrative everyone had already committed to. Eventually, real science walked back into the lab. Turns out humanity's ancestor was just a human skull, combined with an orangutan jaw with the teeth filed down to make everything line up. The lesson here isn't that science is broken. It's that when national pride speaks loudly enough, science sometimes nods along. Story 7. The broadcast that ended the World War of the Worlds. In 1938, radio was the new authority. When the radio spoke, America listened. And that night, the radio said the one thing it really shouldn't have said: aliens were attacking. The War of the Worlds broadcast was staged like breaking news. Serious voices, reporters on the scene. Real locations in New Jersey. Anyone who tuned in late missed the opening line. This is just a dramatization. So fear did the rest. Phone lines jammed. People panicked. Some literally got in their cars and tried to flee from something that didn't exist. Later, Orson Welles said it was art. Newspapers said the opposite. They exaggerated the panic to sell more papers. The truth landed somewhere in the middle. But the lesson was painfully clear. When information is delivered as breaking news, fear skips right past logic. And if this story feels familiar, yeah, today's fake news is basically the same thing. It just doesn't need a radio anymore. Story 8. The Loch Ness Monster Photo. It all started with a photo so blurry that if you posted it online today, people would ask, was this taken with a potato? But in 1934, that photo was more than enough to create a legend. A long neck rising out of the waters of Loch Ness, and just like that, the world met Nessie. The photo was unclear. Details were minimal, but imagination unlimited. The press jumped in. Tourism exploded. Nessie became a pop culture icon despite the fact that no one had ever actually seen it outside of one shaky picture. Decades later, the truth finally surfaced. The image was staged by Marmaduke Wetherell. It was just a model attached to a toy submarine. No monster, no magic, just props. But by then, it didn't really matter. Truth can arrive late. Belief never really leaves. Because in pop culture, sometimes what people love isn't the truth. It's a story good enough to live forever. Story 9. The Ghost Energy Machine. The Keeley Motor. By the late 19th century, science had become a language that sounded incredibly smart, even when no one actually understood what it was saying. And John Keeley used that perfectly. He claimed he had invented a machine powered by etheric vibrations, cosmic frequencies, and several concepts that sounded like they were randomly pulled from a science dictionary with the lights off. Investors didn't really understand it. But they did catch the two magic words, unlimited energy. So the money poured in. Keeley put on dramatic demonstrations. Machines shook. Strange sounds echoed. No visible power cables anywhere. And if anyone asked too many questions, they were politely told they just weren't advanced enough to understand. For years, Keeley lived very comfortably. Only after he died did people finally search the lab and discover a hidden system of air pipes, concealed valves, and good old-fashioned mechanical tricks. Sound familiar? Yeah. The only difference today is that etheric vibrations have been replaced with blockchain. Story 10. The Alien Autopsy Video. In the 1990s, cable TV discovered a golden formula: UFOs plus blurry VHS footage. And that's how the Alien Autopsy Video was born. It looked terrifying, and also kind of like a failed arts and crafts project. But hey, there was video, and apparently that was enough. The host spoke in a serious voice. Dark room, doctors in gloves, a gray creature on the table looking like it had just lost a fight with a meat grinder. Logic tried to speak up, but visuals were louder. An entire generation became convinced we are not alone in the universe, and aliens apparently have very bad skin. Years later, Ray Santilli admitted most of it was staged: a rubber suit and some borrowed organs from a slaughterhouse. But by then it didn't matter. The lesson is simple. Give humans a video that's disturbing enough and they'll turn their brains off and call it evidence. Story 11. The Fake Hitler Diaries. In the early 1980s, journalism relearned an old lesson: it somehow keeps forgetting whoever gets the exclusive first wins. And Stern thought it had just hit the historical jackpot by announcing the discovery of Hitler's personal diaries. Breaking news, exclusive. And honestly, way too good not to believe. The pressure to lead pushed fact-checking into the back seat. Old-looking paper check, signatures kinda match. The story sounds plausible enough, so it went to print with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for moments when history unlocks a new DLC. Then experts started smelling something off. Modern ink, fresh paper, and signatures that looked like someone practiced them during a lazy afternoon. Turns out the entire thing was the work of Konrad Kujau, a forger who was extremely dedicated to his craft. The collapse was loud, public, and deeply embarrassing. The lesson is simple. When you sprint to be first, you're also the first one most likely to trip right in front of everyone. Story 12. Crop circles. For years, perfectly shaped circles appeared overnight in English fields, and people had thoughts. Aliens, cosmic energy, messages from the stars. Experts analyzed them with such seriousness, you'd think they were decoding nuclear launch codes. And then two farmers, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, casually stepped forward and said, "Oh yeah, that was us. Wooden planks and some rope. That was it. No UFOs, no magnetic fields, no interstellar inbox. Just two bored guys, a dark night, and surprisingly solid measuring skills." The funniest part? Even after the confession, a lot of people still shook their heads and said, "No way. The government must have forced them to say that." The lesson here kind of stings. People don't reject the truth because it's wrong. They reject it because it's less interesting than the belief they've already fallen in love with. Story 13. The Burner Street Hoax. Before the internet, people were already trolling each other, just with way more effort. In 1810, Theodore Hook made a bet that he could turn a perfectly normal house in London into pure chaos in a single day. The target, 54 Burner Street. The only tools, a pen, paper, and an alarming number of fake letters. Hook sent out hundreds of invitations under different names and titles. The result? The entire street descended into madness. Coal deliveries, wedding cakes, pianos, doctors, lawyers, priests, even high-ranking officials all showing up one after another. Everyone thought they were at the right place, because the invitations looked way too official to question. Traffic collapsed, residents panicked, authorities were confused. Meanwhile, Hook sat across the street sipping tea, enjoying the show. When the truth finally came out, people realized they'd just taken part in a massive group prank. The bitter lesson. Humans are very easy to fool with anything that looks official, even when it makes absolutely no sense. Story 14. The Fake Lost Works of Shakespeare. By the late 18th century, England's literary world shared one collective dream: to discover a lost work by Shakespeare. Because if you found that, you didn't just get famous, history basically hugged you. And then William Henry Ireland showed up carrying newly discovered Shakespeare manuscripts. Old paper check. Ancient-looking handwriting check. Very serious seals, absolutely. Scholars looked at them and said, "We want this to be true." So they believed it, fast. That belief lasted right up until one of the plays was actually performed on stage. And it was horrendous. Clunky dialogue, weird rhythm, lines that landed so badly the audience started laughing in all the wrong places. That night turned into live evidence that William Shakespeare definitely did not write this. Ireland confessed. The academic world went silent. A collective ego got punctured under theater lights. The painful lesson. No matter how legendary the name, it can't save a bad work, especially when you let the public hear it out loud. Story 15. The Octopus That Lived in Trees. By the late 1990s, the internet was still painfully innocent. Back then, if a website looked serious, it was automatically trustworthy. And that's when a very respectable-looking site appeared, describing a creature that sounded slightly wrong, but still believable if you didn't think too hard. The tree-dwelling octopus. The site had photos, research, conservation warnings, even a detailed habitat description in the Pacific Northwest. Students read it and believed it. Some even wrote emotional essays about saving the octopus from deforestation. Teachers read those essays and graded them. Only later did the creators clarify the truth. It was a prank, a test of critical thinking. There were no tree-climbing octopuses, just humans willing to believe something when information is presented seriously enough. And the funniest part, this story isn't outdated at all. Today, the octopus doesn't need to climb trees anymore. It just needs a headline confident enough to climb straight into our beliefs. Story 16, The Fake Princess Caribou. In the early 19th century, one English village was so bored that anything unusual instantly became an event. And then a woman appeared. She spoke a language no one understood, wore strange clothes, and introduced herself as Princess Caribou from a faraway island nobody could locate on a map. The village came alive. High society was thrilled. They fed her, housed her, and listened closely to stories full of pirates' palaces and tragic royal destiny. No one understood a word she said, but that only made it sound more international. The problem wasn't that the story was convincing. It was that people wanted it to be. They wanted to believe the world was still big. The wonder could randomly show up right in the middle of their quiet lives. Eventually the truth came out. The princess was just Mary Wilcox, the daughter of a shoemaker. The performance ended. The village went quiet again. And the gentle lesson remained. When life gets boring enough, people will believe almost any story that promises an adventure. Story 17. The Fake Ancient Crown, the Louvre. By the late 19th century, when a prestigious museum like the Musée du Louvre acquired a dazzling golden crown, the academic world quietly celebrated. The crown was said to belong to an ancient king, heavy with gold, intricately carved. The kind of object that just looks like it was born to sit behind glass. Experts examined it, nodded, signed off. The public didn't even bother checking. If the Louvre said it was real, then it was real. Reputation handled the rest. Until one day the truth walked into the gallery in a very soft voice. A goldsmith named Israel Rushomovsky stepped forward and casually explained that he made the crown just a few years earlier as a handcrafted gift. No grand conspiracy, no master plan. Just a museum that was a little too confident and an object that was a little too convincing. The lesson turned out to be expensive. Sometimes what makes people believe isn't history, it's the name on the door. Story 18. The Archaeologist Who Buried His Own Artifacts. By the late 20th century, Japanese archaeology had a superstar, Shinichi Fujimura. He had an almost magical talent. Wherever he dug, ancient artifacts appeared older than anything previously known. The press loved him. Scholars were impressed. National history kept getting casually pushed back by hundreds of thousands of years, like someone editing a Wikipedia timeline on hard mode. The problem was, the success was too consistent. Every discovery was perfect. Every find was shocking. Everyone landed right on time for a big headline. But nobody wanted to ask questions because the story was way too beautiful to ruin. Until one morning, hidden cameras caught Fujimura quietly burying artifacts in the ground before the excavation even began. No miracle, no genius intuition, just the advanced preparation. His reputation collapsed faster than an eroded dig site. The lesson here cuts deep in science. The pressure to be admired can make people dig up not just the past, but their own ethics too. Story 19, the Stone Age Tribe. That was basically a set. In the 1970s, the media really needed a beautiful story. A tribe living in total isolation, untouched by the modern world. And so a Stone Age tribe in the Philippines appeared perfect, like it was written for TV. Leaves for clothing, stone tools, a pure primitive life. Cameras rolled, lights came on, and the story was narrated with deep respect. Here's the funny part. The main characters only had to do one simple job: play themselves. But as the version the media wanted to see, the press went wild. Major magazines like National Geographic put it on the cover. The whole world believed it had just watched the past come back to life. Then a few years later, when there wasn't a filming schedule, people returned. And the tribe was wearing jeans, listening to the radio, laughing in a very modern way. The truth showed up the moment the stage lights were off. And the real question isn't who fooled who. It's this: when a story is too perfect to pass up, does the press have the courage to check it one more time? Story 20. The Donation of Constantine. Some hoaxes don't need a big performance. They just need a document that sounds serious enough to quietly rewrite history. That was the donation of Constantine. The text claimed that Constantine the Great had generously handed over control of much of Western Europe to the Pope. Very convenient. And for centuries, nobody seemed inconveniently bothered by it. The document was quoted, copied, and used like a no arguments allowed card whenever power was questioned. People believed it because they needed it to be true. Then the Renaissance arrived, and a few scholars did something dangerous. They actually read the thing carefully. Something felt off. The Latin sounded too modern. Like a Roman emperor casually dropping vocabulary that wouldn't exist until centuries later. Oops! The forgery was exposed. The official response: silence. Long silence. Historically impressive silence. The lesson isn't ancient at all. When a story serves power well enough, belief will happily ignore even the grammar. Story 21. Joyce Heth, age 161. When P.T. Barnum returned to the stage, he didn't bring a monster or a fake artifact. This time he brought a real human being. Her name was Joyce Heth, advertised as 161 years old and supposedly the former nursemaid of George Washington. Just hearing that, you can already smell ticket sales. Joyce Heth was genuinely old, genuinely frail, and she was placed on stage like a living exhibit. Crowds showed up, curious, emotional, sometimes teary-eyed. They believed it, or at least wanted to believe it, because the story was too moving to walk past. Barnum wasn't selling truth, he was selling emotion. And emotion doesn't require paperwork. When Joyce Heth died, a public autopsy was performed. The conclusion was brutally simple: she was around 80, not 161. No grand historical connection. Just a woman turned into a spectacle. Barnum didn't apologize, he just shrugged. Because in American entertainment, truth isn't what decides success. The only real question is, did the audience buy tickets? Story 22. The fake autobiography of Howard Hughes. In the 1970s, Howard Hughes was the perfect person to borrow a name from. Incredibly rich, incredibly eccentric, and most importantly, completely unreachable. No interviews, no public appearances, no corrections. And that's when Clifford Irving had a terrible idea that felt brilliant at the time he announced he was secretly writing Hughes's official autobiography. There were handwritten letters, there were signatures. There were behind-the-scenes stories that sounded cinematic enough to win awards. Publishers believed it immediately. Who wouldn't want exclusive access to the life story of a living legend? The press believed it too, because the story was simply too good to pass up. No one checked very hard, because everyone wanted it to be true. Then everything collapsed with a single phone call. The real Howard Hughes contacted the press and basically said, "I have no idea who this man is." And that was it. One short call destroyed an entire paper castle. The lesson is painfully clear: when the main character stays silent for too long, someone else will happily speak for them as long as the story is good enough. Story 23. The Medieval Travel Tales of Mandeville. In the Middle Ages, the world was still a blurry place. Maps had missing corners. News traveled slowly. And if someone said, "I just went to the edge of the world and came back," the standard response was, "Wow, tell me more." That's how a travel book attributed to John Mandeville showed up, inside everything. One-eyed people, dog-headed humans, lands where diamonds grew like fruit, creatures that sounded like they were invented at midnight with zero sleep. The stranger the story, the easier it was to believe because there was absolutely no way to fact-check any of it. The book spread fast across Europe. Scholars quoted it. Explorers carried it like a guidebook. For centuries, people used a mostly fictional book to imagine the real world. Much later, historians agreed on an awkward truth: Mandeville probably never traveled far and might not have even existed. But by then, it didn't matter. Imagination had already done its job. And once that happens, the truth becomes optional. Story 24, The Hitler Diaries, the more detailed version. When Stern announced it had obtained Hitler's personal diaries, the entire journalism world heard victory bells. Exclusive scoop, living history. Nobody wanted to be the one left outside that party. Problem is, the party moved faster than the menu inspection. Verification was done, for appearances. The paper looked old, the handwriting looked close enough. The backstory had just enough drama to make nobody ask follow-up questions. Because everyone had the same very modern thought: if we don't publish first, someone else will. And then only days later, experts started pointing out the painful details. Modern ink, paper from the wrong era, and signatures that looked like someone practiced them a little too enthusiastically. Turns out the whole thing was the work of Konrad Kujau, a forger with extremely productive hands. And the fall wasn't just one magazine's embarrassment, it exposed an entire media mindset. When exclusivity matters more than truth, mistakes will always run faster than corrections. Story 25, Operation Mincemeat. Not every hoax in history is considered a bad thing. Some get officially stamped as absolutely necessary. Operation Mincemeat was one of those. During World War II, Britain needed to mislead Nazi Germany away from the real invasion plan. The solution sounded like something pitched after zero sleep and too much coffee. Used a corpse. They gave the dead man a full identity. Military rank, love letters, unpaid bills, a life detailed enough to feel real. Then they chained a briefcase to his hand, filled with completely fake top-secret documents, and released the body into waters where the enemy would definitely find it. The Nazis read it. The Nazis believed it. German forces moved in the wrong direction, and it worked. A lie saved thousands of lives and helped shift the course of the war. The interesting part, when the truth eventually came out, no one apologized. Because sometimes history decides that lying isn't a moral failure, it's a strategy. Story 26, Anastasia survived. After the Russian Revolution, the world became obsessed with a question that felt very movie-ready. Did Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov really die, or did she escape? Royal tragedy always wants a miracle. And that miracle showed up under the name Anna Anderson. Anna appeared with sad eyes, fragmented memories, and a story just painful enough to make people want it to be true. Some former courtiers nodded. The public got emotional. The press argued nonstop. Court cases dragged on for decades because everyone loved the idea that something good could survive such a disaster. The problem was, the longer the story lived, the harder it became to stop it. It wasn't until the 1990s, when science casually walked into the room with DNA testing, that the conversation finally ended. The verdict was cold and final, not Anastasia. The ending sounds sad, and it is. But it's also very human. Because when pain is big enough, people will cling to any hope right up until science gently pulls them back to reality. Story 27. The news that crossed the Atlantic. In the mid-19th century, newspapers survived on two things: only fast news and weird news. And then one article dropped claiming that humans had just crossed the Atlantic by hot air balloon in a matter of days. There were technical diagrams, a passenger list, operational details that sounded very professional. People read it and celebrated like Wi-Fi had just been invented. The news spread. Glasses were raised. History was updated right there on the front page. No one asked the most basic question. So where did the balloon land? A few days later, the truth floated gently back down to earth. The whole thing was fiction. The article was written by Edgar Allan Poe, designed to sell papers and prove one simple point: people will believe anything if you give them enough details. The confession came late, followed by some very awkward laughter. But the lesson arrived early. When technology is explained confidently enough, logic tends to lose to imagination, and celebrations usually happen before verification. Story 28. The historical documents found in a dream. Some discoveries come from dirt, sweat, and shovels. And then there are discoveries that come from a dream. William Horne claimed he was shown in a dream the exact location of a buried cache of historical documents. So he dug, and the documents appeared. Dream 1. Reality apparently optional. Scholars believed it because who doesn't love a romantic origin story like that? There were diaries, maps, letters that looked right. Years of research followed trying to stitch this paper treasure into official history. Then the small details turned traitor. Words from the wrong era. Events slightly out of sync. A writing style that sounded suspiciously modern. The investigation dragged on because nobody wanted to be the person who ruined a discovery born from a dream. Eventually, reality woke up. It was all fabricated by Horne. The lesson is sobering. Humans will question data all day, but we're remarkably quick to trust a dream as long as it tells a good enough story. Story 29. Humans riding dinosaurs. In the 1970s, a series of clay figurines surfaced in Mexico, showing humans doing something truly unhelpful for logic riding dinosaurs. Not standing next to them, not pointing from a safe distance, full-on riding like a casual afternoon in Jurassic Park. The images were shocking enough to trigger logic's least favorite response brain offline. Science has been very clear on this one. Humans and dinosaurs are separated by tens of millions of years. But images speak louder. If I can see it, why wouldn't I believe it? And just like that, evolution got politely shoved aside, making room for conspiracy theories that sounded way more exciting. Scientists pointed out that the figurines, often called the Acambaro figurines, were made relatively recently using modern techniques. But facts don't travel as fast as outrage. The internet stepped in, and suddenly the story became immortal. Videos, blogs, forums, all confidently insisting that science was hiding the truth. The funny part, no one actually needs to prove that humans rode dinosaurs. All you have to do is plant enough doubt and the conspiracy will take care of itself. Because on the internet, shocking images will always outrun slow, boring verification. Story 30. England's oldest newspaper. For years, British academia proudly claimed it possessed the oldest newspaper in the country, English Mercury. It was said to be published in 1588, reporting on the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Patriotic, scholarly, and extremely hard to argue with. Here's the funny part. Almost no one actually checked the original. Scholars cited other scholars. Textbooks copied textbooks. Authority quietly multiplied itself. The logic was simple. So many smart people believe this, it can't be wrong. Until a few curious minds finally looked closer. The typography felt a little too modern. The printing techniques didn't match the 16th century. And some passages read less like news and more like historical fan fiction. Eventually, the truth surfaced. English Mercury wasn't from the 1500s at all. It was an 18th century fabrication created as a prank aimed directly at the academic world. The irony landed perfectly. The oldest newspaper didn't fool the masses. It fooled the very people who believed they were the best at checking facts. Story 31. The Amityville Horror. Amityville started with something very real, a brutal murder. The kind that makes any house feel permanently cold. Then a new family moved in, and the story quickly switched channels from police files to primetime entertainment. Strange noises, weird smells, doors opening by themselves, even a demon with a name that sounded like a rejected sports mascot. Each detail got embroidered just a little more, because fear always sells. Books came first. Movies followed. Money flowed faster than holy water. Later investigations showed that many of the paranormal events were exaggerated or straight up invented, with very enthusiastic help from lawyers and publishing contracts. The truth stood quietly off to the side, watching the show continue. The lesson isn't supernatural at all when real tragedy meets entertainment. The line between fact and fiction gets blurry. And in that world, fear is the best director, as long as the audience keeps buying tickets. After 31 stories, one thing becomes really hard to deny. Humans haven't changed nearly as much as we like to think. We still believe things out of curiosity, out of fear, out of hope. or simply because the story sounds nicer than the truth. What has changed is the delivery system. Back then, it was newspapers, radio museums. Today, it's the internet videos and a thumbnail that looks confident enough. So the real question isn't why were people back then so gullible? It's this: if you lived in that time, would you have believed it? And maybe more importantly, which hoax today will make future generations laugh when they look back? Now it's your turn. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who tends to believe a little too fast. And subscribe if you enjoy history told in a way that's not too serious.